Well, joining me now, senior NHL writer for ESPN, Greg Wyshynski, who's covered the league for quite some time. I know it's a really busy time for you. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Yeah, no, boy, it's been a while. I was just thinking back about how I was around. I think my first NHL draft was the Patrick Kane draft. So it's all come full circle. Chicago getting to pick number one.
Well, let's start there with Connor Bedard. I mean, 17-year-old phenom that a lot of people consider a generational talent. What does he offer?
Well, it starts with his shot. I've had scouts tell me that they consider his shot to be otherworldly and magical in the way that he gets his shot off in any situation, and also just the speed and the accuracy of the shot. I had the GM of Team Canada tell me that it sometimes feels like the puck moves 3 or 4 feet before he releases it. Like it's a crazy great shot. So from that aspect, that's probably the best thing about him. But he's an amazing playmaker. Obviously broke a World Junior points record that was previously held by Jaromir Jagr. He's a total package offensive player. And despite being a little undersized on paper, he plays big, which is a huge thing, too, for people that might be a little concerned about him being a little bit closer to, say, like Jack Hughes size than he is to like Austin Matthews size.
I was reading about how ticket sales had surged after they were able to secure this number one overall pick and pick him up. I mean, for the Blackhawks organization, and I like how you mentioned it's a full circle moment for you. When you have a player like this come into a franchise, how much of a game changer can it really be just in terms of interest?
Well, I mean, their ticket sales are insane. I think the first the first 24 hours, their ticket sales were like over $5 million insofar as people buying back in with season tickets. I mean, this was a city that was prepared for the Blackhawks to go back into a prolonged rebuild. I mean, they make the Patrick Kane trade to the Rangers at the deadline. They basically part ways with Jonathan Taves. It looked like it was going to take a while before they circled back to being a contender. And obviously with Bedard to build around, that whole thing gets hastened. I will say, though, that just because you get the guy doesn't mean that you're automatically going to start contending again. I look back at how the respective teams that drafted Sidney Crosby, Alex Ovechkin, Connor McDavid, and Jack Hughes all fared. And in Sid and McDavid's cases, it only took 2 years for them to get to the playoffs. But I think that has a lot to do with having a Evgeny Malkin and a Leon Draisaitl on the roster. In Ovi's case, it took 3 years. I covered those early Capitals teams. He was not skating with Nick Backstrom. He was skating with the likes of like Matt Pettinger at that point, right? So it takes a while to build around these guys. In Jack Hughes' case, not only did it take 4 years for him to make the playoffs, but it took 3 years for him to really kind of actualize as a point per game, star player in this league. So everybody's got their own trajectory, but the common theme, I think, is it really depends on the talent they surround this guy around versus anything that he's going to be due as far as like a Herculean feat of getting them to the playoffs.
You mentioned the Rangers trade, a team that really does have a core intact and still was able to come up short in the playoffs. And Gerard Gallant obviously taking the hit there. Speaking with Rangers insiders, it seems like the knock on Gallant was that he couldn't put the X's and O's together, despite the fact that he's widely considered to be a player's coach. What's your sort of immediate analysis on what went wrong there, and who are you hearing for potential replacements?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. His in-game adjustments were never his forte, going all the way back to his time in Vegas, and it was one of the reasons why they moved on from him. He's not a great tactician. He is a good player's coach. I think there was some concerns also about the trajectory of some of the younger players on the roster. I mean, you had guys like Capo Caco, for example, on Rangers Breakdown Day, talking about the lack of power play time he was getting. And there is something to be said for the idea of like giving these young players bigger spots and giving them more confidence, whether it's Caco or Lafreniere or whomever. As far as replacements go, throughout the Devils Rangers series, there was all this Joel Quenneville scuttlebutt, but it appears, one, the Rangers aren't going to be the ones to ask the NHL to clear him, and two, obviously the NHL hasn't cleared him from that sexual assault investigation with the Blackhawks when he was the coach there, and the fact that Gary Bettman now has this soft ban on both him and Stan Bowman, the GM of that team. So it doesn't sound like that's the avenue they go to, but you look around at the coaches you'd consider to be upgrades over Gerard Gallant, and it's not a very long list. I mean, there's not a lot of guys that are available that really have his experience and his success and his regular season pedigree. They could go younger. They've got a good coach in the AHL right now. There is some great pie in the sky conspiracy theory-esque, can they pry Mike Sullivan away from the Penguins kind of stuff going on, which is always fun. But overall, it's an interesting move. You'd think it's one you make if you know who the next guy is going to be, but then the Rangers have never exactly been rational creatures.
Would Barry Trotz be a stretch?
I think it'd be a stretch now because he seems like he's ensconced in that new role in Nashville. I mean, yeah, I have to remember that like part of Barry's decision in going to Nashville is comfort. He has a home there. I think he sees, based on his age and based on where he is in his career, that this could be a next step that carries him for the next 5 years rather than doing the day-to-day grind of being an NHL coach. So while I was surprised by that flex, and I assume that it's going to depend a lot on who he surrounds himself with as far as his success as a GM, I'm not quite sure if he'll be that compelled to take over a Rangers team that, let's face facts here. I mean, like for Gallant paying for this job, for this failure with his job, we should rationally look at the fact that if it wasn't for Jacob Trouba taking out Sidney Crosby in the previous first round last year, they're probably losing in the first round in consecutive seasons. So it's not as if Trotz or anybody else is taking over a team that's like on the precipice of a cup right now.
It seems like this is, I don't want to spend too much time on it because I know I only have you for a couple more minutes here, but it seems like this is a pivotal decision for Chris Drury in terms of going left or right, going younger, going into some of those names that have been mentioned in the AHL, or finding another guy who's a player's coach who might be on par with Gallant, something similar. I mean, for a decision as important like this, do you think that they should risk it and roll the dice and maybe try a younger guy who can continue to develop the younger core?
I'm all in favor in every situation of going with a younger guy. Like, I'm not a big retread guy. Sometimes it works out. Like, for example, in Jersey, where it seems like Lindy Ruff has really worked out. But like, do the Rangers become automatically better if like Peter Laviolette makes him his like 9th team in the NHL? Probably not. I mean, there are some guys that I think have gotten a lot of chances and are good coaches, but not necessarily game changers. And what you need in this league is more John Coopers, is more guys that come up from the AHL, get their shot, take over a team, and then go on a magnificent run. I mean, it's a retread league, and that has to change, especially when we're looking at an NHL that is remarkably different in 2023 than it was in 2013, for example.
All right, let's spend a couple minutes just diving into some of these playoff series that are underway here. And Vegas with a pretty convincing Game 3 win, but now they've got maybe an issue with goaltending. What's the latest you're hearing there in terms of health? And how are they able to limit Connor McDavid's productivity, in your opinion?
Well, I'm not on that series, so I don't know anything about the health of the goalies. But the defensive front they put against the Oilers in that Game 3 was really impressive. I mean, taking time and space away from them, but most importantly, obviously staying out of the penalty box. It's a combination of two things, probably. It's like playing disciplined for sure, and not giving the Oilers but one power play chance throughout the majority of the game. But I'm also kind of like, I'm not a big conspiracy theory guy, but I tend to, I feel like I've seen this before, where if a team is clicking at like 56% on the power play, the referees know this. They're not dumb. And I think there's sometimes a hesitancy to give that team too much of an advantage in a critical game in a 1-1 series. So all of a sudden give the Oilers like 3 power plays because, based on the numbers, they're going to score at least one. So I think it's probably a combination of two things: disciplined hockey, good defensive hockey, and maybe getting not the 50-50 calls that maybe the Oilers got in Game 2.
A conspiracy theory. I love it. That just dropped right in the middle. Okay, so how about New Jersey? They were in a 2-0 hole against the Rangers. Now they find themselves in something of a precarious position, but they were able to get back into this series. Do you see them being able to do something similar, rattling off 3 straight?
I think it's possible. The thing about the Hurricanes in particular is how different they are on the road than they are at home. And it has very much to do with the matchups they get. Jordan Staal played above 9 minutes against Jack Hughes in games 1 and 2. And then in Game 3, I think he played less than 4 minutes against him. And what happens? Jack Hughes gets a 4-point night, right? So like the ability to get your best players away from Carolina's best defensive players is a real key to beating them. And so in Jersey, they can get those matchups. In North Carolina, they really can't. So I do think the Devils are going to rally in this thing. But then it becomes a matter of doing the heavy lifting, which is finding a way to take a game in Raleigh. And based on the first 2 games of the series, I'm not sure if they can. Like, they really got rolled in those 2 games. Now, in their defense, Nico Hischier said after the Rangers series that they're quick learners. What they did wrong in games 1 and 2 against the Rangers was remedied by Game 3, and they played great after that. for the most part. So there is something to be said for the Devils kind of understanding what went wrong in those games so spectacularly in Raleigh. And I think one of the things that Lindy Ruff talked about, their coaches, this idea of like, look, it ain't going to be easy. There's going to be guys in your faces. You're not going to have a lot of room to create. You're going to make mistakes, but you have to put some risk in your game, and you can't play conservatively. You have to be as dynamic as possible, even if it means turnovers, even if it means that you're going to make mistakes. And I think they learned that lesson in game 3, and it'll be interesting to see if they can apply it when they go back on the road.
Yeah, this team is interesting to me because it seems like a talented, young, somewhat inexperienced group in some ways, but they're so fast and they have the ability to really do special things when it all clicks. And it seems almost like a learning on the fly sort of situation, but they're able to back their way out of these corners and advance. Is this a team in your mind that if they do continue to get this education kind of feet to the fire is good enough to win this series and to potentially go much further than that?
I think I said it, the Rangers fans and the Rangers sphere of people were all very hard on their stars. They're like, why can't Patrick Kane do more? Why can't Tarasenko do more? Why can't Zibanejad do more? And I'm like, well, because the Devils won't let them. Like when the Devils play their game, and in game 3, for the most part, outside of some mental lapses on the power play, was their game. There's not a team in the league that could really beat them. When they use their speed, when they're playing in both ends, like I've seen them completely shut down teams. I saw them limit the Islanders to 1 shot on goal, I think, in a period earlier this year, and it was the first period. So like when they are going with what they do best, they're very, very hard to beat, especially if they're getting any semblance of goaltending. So if they get past this series, yeah, I mean, the sky's the limit for the way that this team plays, especially if they remain healthy, and especially if they can, like I said, get average goaltending. It's become a league of like, we don't expect you to steal a series, we expect you not to lose a series kind of goalies. And the Devils have 2 of those guys. So if they can find one to not lose a series, I think they'll be in good shape.
Just really quickly, because you brought up the Islanders, their power play is so abysmal. I watched a number of those games against Carolina, and I was rooting for those guys. I like so many of their players. They cannot figure out the power play. It's like they're worse when they have a man advantage.
Yeah.
And what is the solve for that? Is that coaching, or is that just, what is that?
Well, if it was against Carolina, it's the Hurricanes is part of it.
Well, I mean, they were
second best penalty kill in the regular season. They do some really good things.
Yeah.
But as far as the Islanders go, like their power play is a combination. Maybe it's some tactics, and maybe it's also some personnel. I mean, let's see what happens next season if they can get a few more people that can put the puck in the net. Like, I'd love to see Vladimir Tarasenko get a run with the Islanders next year if possible, just to have another person who's a bit of a trigger man to play with a Barzal or alongside a Horvat on the power play. They need more people that can put the puck in the net. I think that's one of the real issues with their power play right now.
I don't know if you're on the Dallas-Seattle series, but have you been following that series at all? I was just
I've been following all the series. It's hard to give you medical info on stuff that I'm not around on.
Okay. What do you think the game 4 key is in that series?
It's for Dallas to settle down a little bit. I felt like in the games in which Seattle has really played well in this series, they've been hard on the forecheck. They've played physically. They're rolling 4 lines, and Dallas seems to get a little bit out of their game and a little bit out of sorts. And, when they carried play in game 2, they looked like a Stanley Cup champion. So they need to be able to withstand the waves that come at them, especially early. Seattle's been a great early starter in these playoffs. And then once they do that, hopefully rely on Jake Ottinger to carry the rest of the load. And much like the Devils had the first 2 games of that Rangers series to rely on as sort of proof of concept, Dallas had a game 4 against Minnesota where, game 3 was garbage. And then they came back and eked out a 1-goal win in game 4 to really kind of turn the series on its head. So I think they're going to rely on that. I tend to believe they're going to be okay. But the biggest thing for me is you got to reunite that top line already. Like, they're getting nothing out of Jason Robertson this series. They've got Joe Pavelski back. He's healthy. Pavelski, Hintz, Robertson is one of the best lines in the NHL over the last 3 seasons, it seems like. So get going on that. Reunite the Triforce there if you can.
Let's end with the Leafs Panthers. What do the Leafs need to do to get back into this series if it's possible?
Well, win a game would help, but no, I mean, the only way they're getting back into this series is by putting a little fear into the Panthers. And you do that by having an overwhelming offensive performance in game 4. And here we go. Like, we're breaking out. You guys don't have a hold on us anymore. But the problem is that they've scored like 2 goals in what seems like the last 4 or 5 games. And that's not a recipe for putting that fear in anybody. They're in a heap of trouble, not only because of the way the Panthers are playing, and they looked like one of them locked in 95 Devils type teams that just like has found their swagger and their physicality, and they're getting them and the Kraken are the 2 teams, in my opinion, that are getting better as the playoffs go along. And with Bobrovsky having his best series right now of the playoffs, I mean, it's a real tough road back for the Leafs. And it's incredible. Like, you get whiplash watching the Toronto media. Like, a week ago, they were planning the parade for a team that finally won in the playoffs. And like a week later, it's like, okay, who's the new GM going to be? It's like, it's wild.
Just one last one for you. As it relates to kind of the macro view of when teams get into the playoffs, is it more about coaching and adjustments at this point in the postseason? Is it about players just rising to the occasion? You see some of these teams from a naive point of view, an outside point of view, that seem to be plagued by adjustments, and X's and O's, really. And then you see some of these teams that just are finding the right time. They're clicking, they're skating out of their minds. I mean, in your mind, when it comes to the postseason, what makes or breaks a team?
I think it's very much on the players. Like, the coach can do everything that they can to try to give them game plans and try to play around with the lineups and move lines around. And sometimes that works, and sometimes it's just rearranging the deck chairs in the Titanic, for lack of a better anomaly or comparison. But I think for me, it's like, covering the playoffs for a really long time, it really does come down to sort of the mental aptitude of the players. How are they handling the situation? What does the pressure feel like? The things that the outside noise they have to block out. I mean, you look at the Bruins in the first round, for all the talk about them being a veteran team and blocking out the noise, the bottom line is that they're not only trying to beat what is a Panthers team that's really finding themselves, but they're also carrying the weight of win one for Patrice, win one because you're the President's Trophy winner, win one because you're the best regular season team of all time. I mean, it's like, there's a lot of weight that these guys carry in the playoffs from an expectation standpoint, and that could really kind of mess with their process a little bit. And then on top of that, it's also a lot of things aren't going well, so we're trying to force it now. And once that starts happening, you play right into your opponent's hands.
Greg Wyshynski, best of luck to you the rest of the way. Thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.